Hi, everyone. Welcome
Hi.
to the third and final live event of the webinar Crisis Education, Critical Education, hosted by the Artes University of the Arts in the Netherlands. This multi-part series emerged because I think in our immediate community of art educators and researchers, there was a growing concern that the shift to the online education because of the COVID-19 global pandemic was so quick that it did not give us enough space to think beyond operations, logistics, platforms. But all of us who work in classrooms and teach in them know that beyond the technologies and techniques and processes, pedagogy and learning have a very different conversation. And especially with connected and online learning, it's important to pause, reflect, and critically engage, not with just how we teach, but what we teach for and who do we teach with. My name is Nishant Shah. I am the professor of aesthetics and cultures of technology at ARTES and also the director of research and outreach. And along with Cecil Mary Tone and Jonathan Roos, it has been my pleasure to curate this webinar that has brought some really critical voices to the fore. In our first module, we talked about what is at stake when you move online. In the second, we discussed hacks and interventions to stop the seamless narrative of digitization as an answer. And today in the third module, I'm very pleased to have the expert inputs from Dr. Theo Besselink, Dr. Fabiola Camuti, and Dr. Jeroen Lutter. That's a lot of doctors. And they are all going to share with us their expertise in organizing and building communities to achieve transformative educational practices. I'm going to do very quick introductions. If you find them exciting, which you will, I'm hoping that you will just find them on search engines of different kinds. You can make your pick. Let me begin with Theo. Theo Besselink is the founder of the Learning Lab in the Netherlands, and he himself described it, and I'm quoting, "It is as a place of inquiry and creation in a collective effort to understand and form ourselves and the not yet sustainable worlds around us, to contribute to it with audacity and respect, and to grow in what makes us human, our creative capacity for meaningful action." Fabiola Camuti is a dramaturge, researcher, and she works at the intersections of art education, gendered and social justice, and critical performances. She is a colleague for me at ARTES. And in her role as a senior researcher, she is committed to building new infrastructures of equitable education and engaged learning through a variety of projects in art-based learning within the Professorship of Art Education as Critical Tactics. Which brings me to Jeroen, because he is the professor of art education as critical tactics, within which Fabiola is also located. The AECT is a radical vision of art education that stems from theories of creativity, a critical investment in user-centered learning, and a framework of art-based learning that engages with de-disciplined narratives ranging from memory and violence to healthcare and cultural analysis. Jeroen is interested and invested in harnessing the power of creativity to rethink the form, format, and function of art education and create new missions to position the role of arts as a transformative practice. So thank you, all the three of you, for recording those videos, for sharing already some of your knowledge, and for joining me today in having a conversation of what do we talk about when we talk about connected education, if for once we stop thinking about the technologies of connectivity. And I think I want to kind of begin there as my first prompt to all of you. Because in all the three inputs, you all surprisingly make an interesting distinction between institutions and collectives or communities, right? Fabiola made this distinction and she kind of went really hard on saying, no, one is about strategy and one is about tactics. Or that institutions strategize, communities have tactical interventions. Jeroen, in your talk, when talking about sacrificing the unreal, started thinking of this in a dichotomy of planning and serendipity. Institutions plan as if everything is in control, whereas communities are serendipitous, accidental, they are organic, they encounter different things and they thrive in the not knowing. And Theo, you anchored it very beautifully in the idea of institutions are spaces where you might belong, but they are not necessarily spaces of participation, right? This idea that participation happens outside of it was wonderful. So in all of these, formulations, I'm now very curious because the three of you also work in the context of institutions. And I'm very curious to understand how you negotiate this, right, in your own practice, this in betweenness, being inside and outside the institution simultaneously. And what are the ways in which they kind of reshape the institutions? How are you shaping the institutional practices in your own practice? I would like to begin there.
Yeah.
You want to take it up? There's so much to say about this topic.
Please go.
Right, I'll do it. I'll go ahead. Yes, because I've always worked with one leg inside and one leg outside of the institutions, and it's a continuous tension that I think is healthy, and I mean it should be there. But it is always a place that is negotiated. It's always a place that is threatened. It's always a place that needs protection of some kind, and that can be done in many different ways. It can be protected by a sense of meaning that is shared. It can be protected by institutional means. It can be protected by people that just use their position or their person to stand in between, or it can be protected by culture, or it can be protected by outside support. But that you have to organize sort of the safety of it, because the institutions are they sort of have a tendency to either to colonize the space or to not recognize it as its own. So it's interesting. So what we try to do is have a lot of partnerships outside, and have a good deal of the learning happen in the spaces outside of the institution, and to have within the institutions different alliances and different partnerships too. So we do not belong to any single department or faculty, for instance. Have different kinds of money from different kinds of places, supporting it. They can also change, so they enable also the flexibility of what we do. But yes, it is also quite a lot of extra work, which brings me to the point that it requires a special kind of, staff to sort of operate in that space. Then the management of these relationships, the different kinds of contracts that also social contracts that you create. It's always a negotiated space that is in movement. Maybe to start with that.
Yeah, I want to pick up exactly from one of the first things that actually Che said at the beginning, this idea of the place of negotiation, which was the same formulation that I had in mind, because of course it is true that it creates internal and external tensions, which it's good. Tensions often bring to, having to build some kind of awareness about where you want to go. And but I also have the feeling that also within an institution is also another multi-layer system. Let's say it's not just about institution and community outside, but also inside the institutions you have different layers, because of course institutions have a managerial operation, and then you have the administrative part, and then the more educational related part, which includes of course teachers, students, research part. So also that creates and other layers, and every layer can be divided and on and on and on. So for me, the fact of working, of course, inside an institution, it also helps in shaping a sort of identity. So, for example, what we do, and I don't want to speak for Jeroen, but of course, as Nishan already said, we both work at the same professorship. With the ICT professorship, is trying exactly to shape a specific identity that exists for itself, whether it works inside an institution or outside an institution. And what we have seen with the projects we work on is that actually the support of the institution often comes into trying to reshape the general way of looking at education. Also, so looking at a way of changing the habits and the attitudes. because those become, and it's normal, I think, to think that institutions also have some kind of chronicle habits that remain there until someone then points out that, hey, something is not working anymore. And often it's someone from within. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to be the person from inside who looks for the tactics, those in between spaces. So it's for me, it's always a matter of finding the ways inside to change the attitudes.
Arun,
Yeah.
would you like to jump into that as well? Because I know that you have a practice of, in fact, of doing this from the within, of radical transformation from within the institution.
Yeah, and it is quite in history. I think just to go back for a moment, institutions are not something that always existed in the way they are. So it's not something natural. It's something artificial. So you can change, and that's for the first to start with. A very important thing to realize that you don't need institutions the way they are. So you're free in this, and you're not obliged to respond to the need for institutions. That's first of all something to realize. Then secondly, as it comes to myself, I always hated institutions from the beginning of my life. So that's a bit of the story of my life, is a troublesome relation to institutions. So that's secondly very important. On the other hand, I love communities. That's also the story of my life, that from the start of my life, I loved communities. So that's the third point. And the fourth point is that institutions, in a way, occupied the communities. So that's also a fact of life that you have to realize, that in money streams, in people who have work, in all kinds of situations, they occupy the space of community and they take the rules. Now, I'm a realist. Next to that, I'm an idealist. I mostly call myself try to be a kind of new realist. So realism is more than pragmatism for me. Realism is also seeing the different sides of life. And when I try to look to institutions at the moment, I think that we're on the level that we have to look very critical to what institutions does, just like capitalism, just like all kinds of forms which are interrelated with each other. Therefore, I'm a professor because I want to study that. That's my job. That's my daily life. That's my life, in fact, that I want to study what happens. What are the consequences of living with institutions? Facing this, being critical in this, and then after being for a long time critical, because sometimes in this mode of always making something beautiful out of it, after being for a time very critical, just letting something in that becomes creative and positive. But I really want to point out that just to take your time to be critical before becoming creative in this, because that's the big trap of institutions at the moment.
Thank you. That's actually a really great way of opening up this conversation. And I'm really glad that you are already helping me at least move away from the dichotomy of institution versus community and realize that there is a symbiotic, if not a parasitic relationship between the two. Because many times what happens is that all of us, at least all the four of us who are in conversation, have the privilege, because the institution does protect us in so many different ways. And it's very easy for us to go out and saying, yeah, we don't need institutions, but we are of course protected by the very institutions that we sometimes critique, right? And so that would be kind of an interesting struggle to take through. But in all of your inputs, I think one of the things that you all talked about in different ways was intimacy. I thought that was beautiful, that you are trying to hack the institution not by process, politics, policy, and so on, but you kind of all focused on the question of intimacy, of connection, of trust, of collectivity. And for a lot of the people who are watching this, I'm wondering if you would be able to spell this out in a more concrete way, right? Like, what does this mean? What does this mean to develop a practice of intimacy and trust with the communities that you are engaging with? And I'm wondering, Fabiola, if you want to kick us off with this.
Yeah, thanks for using the words the word intimacy. I didn't think of that, but in fact, now that you unpacked all the things we have tackled in the videos, they do point out to actually this formula that you used, because to me it really comes down to trust and this matter of commitment. That of course it comes to a sort of building this idea of an intimate relationship, and what it means in practice, I think it can mean really a lot of things. But if I go back to some examples just to make it practical, this shift that we had in the past few months, that the risk that we all faced, I think, or at least many of us, was to lose some contacts. And on some level we did, or at least I speak for myself. On some level they became more rare or less intense, so they just changed the form in a way that didn't feel right anymore. On other level, other context not only remained stable, but actually found another life. And with this, I don't want to say that this is the new format that makes it better, but it's the premise that is different. It's as if something was already there. Chu talked in his video about a matter of faith, something that you share. And I think it goes down to that, something that you have in common, that you share, and no matter what, you want to continue. And I can bring two examples, for example, and one are example for example, but that's one is again the ICT team and the ICT community, as I think we can call it, and the other one is the project of No School that we work on. With the ICT team, we had to find ways to keep on communicating, and a lot of ideas came up immediately. So this thing of having some kind of a ICT post, to have a constant journal, and people kept on, giving inputs and communicating. We kept all our meetings, and they never felt as a burden. Well, I can assure you that a lot of other meetings did feel as a burden, because sometimes I arrive at the end of the day and I think like, okay, I've worked all day, but what have I done actually? I've sat through meetings the whole day. But those meetings never feel as a burden. It is an actual moment of sharing, because the premise is different, and that creates a completely different point of departure. And with the No School project was exactly the same. Now already the name is seems already quite anti-institutional in itself, which in a way it is. But as we said already before, it's done starting within institutions. But it was again, we had stuff that we wanted to do, and no matter what, we knew that we were going to do it. And please, Jeroen, of course, is all part of the process, so if you want to carry on from the No School, please.
Can I?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, please.
Because this relates to a kind of design, and because I posted everything in life is makeable or something like that, but design is on the other hand also very important. And in studying, where we are studying not only the topics that are our topics on education, on arts, we're also studying ourselves and how we relate to ourselves. And we do that in intimacy, but also in critical intimacy, like Spivak calls it. So we are also critical towards ourselves and critical toward the other. So, and not in a negative mode, but just in a trust mode, that not being critical towards each other is not taking each other seriously. It's babbling, And in studying ourselves, we made, in a way, a quite very something that we didn't expect it. There occurred something that we didn't expect it. That there was, in the former professorship we had together, there was something really not okay. And in studying that, we found out that the professorship was designed as a neoliberal system. That it worked like rankings and grants and projects, and that once you were hired for a project, and once the project was over, we took another, and everybody had to be fierce, and so on and so on. And we realized at some time that this is in fact that we were just doing in our community what we opposed in our theory of education. So Then came the moment that we sat together, okay, we want to change this. We want to do something else. And we designed then a cooperative model. And that is what we are now doing for a year or something like that. We are working in this cooperative model. And what does this mean, actually? Because this has severe consequences. It means that we never take up a project anymore in the sense of that we're project-based. We're taking up things in the community. It means also that an individual is, of course, responsible in doing things, but in fact, the community is responsible for every individual. So it means that also when an individual gets into a problem, when a project doesn't work the way it should, when even the individual who does this project is not the best one in doing so, we are fully responsible together to get them on track again and to get the project on track again. So that's a real commitment from the community to the individual. And this, in the end, I can tell a lot more about it, but in the end, what it means is, and I think that that is the big change in the 21st century, when you compare it to the 20th century. For me, the 20th century was the age of the individuals, and for me, the 21st century is the age of the community. And you see this in this act, but you also see it, for example, in sustainability or climate or in finance or in sickness, that when we stay looking from me as the center of the world, we won't face the problems we have. We have to look from the community to the individual, starting with the community, ending with the community. Just one thing about theories, I like very much Kropotkin, an old anarchist. He had his own interpretation of Darwinism. Darwinism, and that's the old fable we make, is the survival of the fittest. So it's the individual against the individual. Kropotkin had another interpretation of Darwinism. He said that the fittest is the one who can cooperate best. That's the fittest. So survival of the fittest in the Darwinistic sense means the people who can cooperate survive. And that's in fact the basic theory also where friends of mine like Peter Blom from the Triodos Bank works, or where I work. We have this funding way of looking at society that basically the only way to get out of this trap is to make as the first paradigm the community and the individual as a part of the community.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Theo, do you
nice.
want to jump in? Because this looks like it's like
Yes.
almost an unpacking of the DNA of what you do.
It's wonderful. I think it's a big search for how to live, learn, and work together. So this, maybe I wanted to say about two things, something about how we as basically staff deal with this, being in this situation, and what we think this cooperation entails. And so maybe to start with the staff, it's a very personal journey. The intimacy comes from bringing ourselves in, right? The journeys that we are personally on, because funnily enough, there's no community without individual either. So if you do not have some place from where you connect to the other, if there is no self, there is no together either, right? So bringing in self is a very essential practice that we have to live, so that students can also follow that, because our institutions do not generally value that. I believe, to connect to the former conversation, we're building new kinds of institutions, right, wherein the self has a place, the whole self, I have to say, right. And this is tricky because you could become vulnerable, and during the process of leading a cooperative learning journey, you will encounter many different difficulties, uncertainties, ambiguities, conflicts, that yeah, it'll depend on how you facilitate that, what will happen next, whether that will stay an intimate community or whether that will become, you know, a policed community. And so every time we as hosting team, as staff, ask ourselves, so who are we being in this moment that they show up the way they do? Like, right? It's a mirror. So what am I bringing in on today? What do I bringing in today? And where I am with my mind, or, you know, what am I doing that makes this the way it is? And so bringing in the real, I really liked what Jeroen said in his talk, bringing in the actual real, the real in this space, which is not just the cognitive ideas or the, you know, what is real in this moment, does have the work. And that's a continuous practice. It's not a one-time, you know, organization. It is a continuous struggle to do that. So yes, the community as is like a pedagogical unit, yeah. So give everybody that responsibility together. It's also something the community has to learn, every individual has to learn. How do I do that? Like, how am I a being that is part of a bigger whole? How do I see myself being part of this bigger whole without losing myself? You know, and with sorry, yes.
Yeah, and in this, I think I wonder how you look at this.
Yeah,
I'm
yes,
looking through
yes.
the plants in your background. Beautiful.
Mm.
And it makes me think of a kind of theory that is for me very important as a concept underneath my thinking in this towards communities and also towards the self and people. When we talk about the self and about people, we talk about communities. Mostly, we see a community as a quantitatively uh, counting of individuals, and for
Yeah,
me, that's not a community. So it's not x plus x plus a plus b is the community. No, for me, the community is an organism. And
yes,
this is very important to me. So it is it's an organism with parts. It's like you are the lungs or the heart or the brains or the muscles, and so are people in a way in this bigger organism of the community. And now, what is essential for me is the division, and I oppose this division. So I'm a bit of a Spinozist. I oppose the division between nature and people.
of
I
course, yeah.
don't, and I think that in some way this is the biggest problem, also towards intimacy. That when I think of a plant like something being different of me as a person, or I see Fabiola as something different as being me, then there the quarrel starts. And then you need all kinds of systems to bring it together in a kind of fancy thing. Once you start to realize that nature is creative, because creative is for me very essential in this, when you start like a Bergson thinking, or like a Spinoza thinking, or people like that, or even Deleuzian thinking or Spivak thinking, that there is a similar energy going, and that is creative in nature, in people, in houses, in communities, then the only thing that we have to do is be secure that we sacrifice this unreal thing time after time in making something else of it than what it is. So just letting go, and then it cures. And I wonder how you look at this. Do you see also this similarity between what is happening in nature, in persons, or do you see this dual? I wonder. It's just an open question.
I mean, so for me, the distinction between nature and culture, or humans is what got us in the trouble in the first place, right?
Yeah,
That is it's a sort of a big construction
exactly.
that we made. But yeah, as we are finding ourselves in trying to shape another kind of ontology, another way of being in the world, we're trying to find practices that go with that, to find, you know, identities that go with that, find, you know, institutions that that can mediate that idea. And that's where the trouble starts for us. How do I live that? And how do I live that in my learning community, which of which the plants are a part of? They're also the community, right?
And in this sense, there happened yesterday something really, that really worries me, or a few days ago. You saw these two, the mechanism and the organic approach. When in Amsterdam on the Dam, people came together. And now suddenly there is a complete accusation that they disrupted because they didn't feel like the corona crisis. I agree that people have to be careful. But what I've actually saw were people that were careful. And
they can't.
I don't hear that. So I'm very much, it makes me, in a way, now angry is not a good word, but it hurts me that people who were there in such a good mood, who took so much care for each other. There was no way of angriness. There was no way of people who opposed. There was no way of, and of course, it could be better, but this made me so proud of how people were together. And I'm really hurt that this whole story is now putting into quite another concept of mechanical belief, of not trusting the organism, how it works, and not helping the organism that it works in a good way. And this is exactly, for me, the institutional approach and the other approach. And what I miss in this, and I hope that we can make a shift in this together, because there we need science, that we really make new arguments, new theories, new empirical data to make it true also for people, that they can understand how it works. I don't know how you look at this thing that happened.
Jeroen, thanks for bringing that in. I mean, it is necessary to acknowledge that while we are trying to have this rational, civilized conversation about communities, there are two global trends that we are in the midst of. One, of course, is the pandemic, which doesn't allow for proximity anymore. And then what do you do with intimacy or connection if the physical space and body are kind of dematerialized? And the second is the fact that what the incident that Jeroen is referring to, of course, is the congregation of people who came together in Amsterdam, but in also different places in the Netherlands, but around the world, to show solidarity against police brutality in the US on unarmed Black people, where George Floyd was actually killed in face of witnesses and viral testimony by a white police officer who was not even punished for the first 3 days of the incident. And of course, a large part of the US are right now burning. But it also allows me to perhaps now play the devil's advocate with you. Great, communities are fantastic. We know that. People coming together are wonderful. We know that. Finding a sense of purpose, belonging, the word that Hugh used in his video, faith, is great. But communities are also incredible means of exclusion and perpetuating social reproduction and injustice. And that's been one of my major concerns when thinking about this online shift, because we keep on thinking about, oh, we are going to connect to our communities, but it stops there. We only connect with our communities. There is almost kind of a retreat into the home and the community as the safe space where we don't need to look outside anymore, right? And I'm very now curious about what do you do, because if institutions are designed, so are communities. And while we like to believe that communities share the same root as the commons, we also know that communities also share the same root with excommunication. Right? It's throwing people out and making borders and boundaries. And Fabiola, I was wondering if you want to jump in, because I know you have been thinking a lot about communities and the borders of exclusion, especially when it comes to, for instance, gender.
I couldn't hear. I cannot hear you, Nishant, well. Sorry.
Sorry. I was saying, do you want to jump in? Because I know you have been working on questions of exclusion within communities when it comes to access of labor and gender? And how do you kind of negotiate with this, right? So the idea is not to offer community as an easy solution, but in fact continue to negotiate with the notion of the community when thinking of connectivity.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, thanks for this question, because actually that's what I was trying to refer to when at the beginning I said I talked about this idea of changing habits and changing attitudes, because also inside institution or inside communities is you said it absolutely right. There's always this idea of excommunication, so outside the community. So what is not similar to me does not belong here. So it's someone to be seen as an outsider, and nobody likes the outsider. And but this for me, it goes needless to say that, of course, what you said about this shift online, and we have the privilege of talking in a way that allows us to say that we can connect to our community, but it's also a matter to be acknowledged that goes back to sustainability and resources, because not everyone has the same resources. So now, for example, we can have this talk, we can use our fast connection, but this is anyway a problem to be tackled. If you look at the online shift in education when it comes to primary education or high schools, not everybody has the possibility of actually put into place this online shift. So already this is a form of excommunication. Within a community, within a classroom, for example, you can create already two different types of people. And one belongs to one community that is one of the privileged one that can follow the shift, and the other one that stays left behind. And this, I think, goes back to the role that education actually has. That somehow is kind of lost. And when you said that I've been working in trying to figure out way of tackling issue of hierarchy in education, and that when it comes to gender and race and classes, I wonder exactly what it means to give back the idea of the existence of the community before creating a community as such. So when it comes to we can talk about didactics and pedagogies and creating new forms of education and new curriculum buildings, but all this can become empty containers when we don't actually address the issues, the prominent issues. So what are we bringing? What is the role? What are we doing with our educational system? So how do we now in 2020 are addressing issues of class, issues of race, issues of gender, all this that is happening at the moment? Finally, and every now and then it constantly happens. And then I also wonder why someone has to then tragically die before we all have an outburst. And there are also within the Netherlands there have been cases really similar to this. And I don't want to compare, of course, the systematic racism that exists in the US towards the Afro-American community. But just, I think 1 month before the whole pandemic started, in Zwolle, or in a place next to Zwolle, a man of Haitian origin was apprehended by police. And the same thing exactly happened. He was carried out and he arrived at the police station already dead. Then the pandemic started and all this completely faded. So I really wonder, what are we doing before as an educational system, as an educational community? And we really, when it comes to responsibility, I really put myself there. What am I doing when I talk to my students? What am I doing when I talk in class to try to give the sense of what it means to build a community and the risks that a community has? Because also white people belong to a community.
I don't see that as before what you say. I see that as present. I see that not as, and that's for me very important, because for me that you react in the present is for me foremost the idea. So you can have all kinds of theories before and all kinds of semiotic advances afterwards. But in fact, it is what do you do in the present? And in this present, one of my great heroes is still, since my 14th birthday, when I for the first time received a book of him, is Albert Camus. And in his famous book, The Rebel, he ended that which makes man human, and man not only man but all people human, is that he can say no. That's in fact the answer to absurdism. He can say no. And this is something that is really in the present. It's existential, in the present, to say, no, I won't go for it. And in this saying no, not being negative in a no, and not falling into the trap that other people won't try to believe, to make you believe that no is negative, but saying no in, I want space. I want space for the honest relation. And I say no to the form of dishonesty. And I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. And I don't fall in the trap to have an immediate answer, because they will ask you. And then you have to say no. And then something can raise, I think, in a kind of community perspective, or even in an online environment. Then suddenly something becomes real, because you say no to the unreal. And I think that's important. And that's in the present.
Do you want to jump in? Because I think this is also very close to where you actually, at some point in your video, said that we need to find the soul of education, right? We need to redefine what's actually important for education before we start on that process. And for me, it seems like that. I mean, we're being very careful in not using the word ideology and politics and value system. So let's stick to soul and faith and see if that ability helps us going forward.
Yeah, and I think that is very much to do with finding our place in this, on this earth, as educational institutions or programs or teachers or students. So what is our place here? What do we belong? Do we belong to this place? And if we do belong to this place, then, you know, the context is your education, right? The context of, you know, the ecological collapse, the, you know, the class struggles, and so forth. That is happening at your doorstep. And if, you know, and if it is, and if what is happening at your doorstep is not part of what you do every day, then you're not teaching, right? You're not an educational institution. So, but we've abstracted it so much from our context, right? So for me, I think it's about that. It's about that refinding or regrowing roots to the reality of our immediate context, and immediate has become global. Yeah, so our part in society. Also, like many of the times we try to redevelop or restructure education within the boundaries of education, but that's not gonna, that's impossible. Like that's what it is for, and where it gets its life from is from its context, and the wider organism that it's a part of. So how do we there's a kind of dying happening, right, in our institutions. You know, they've sort of fixed into certain patterns that our economy and our, you know, our societies have grown into during the, you know, the modern period up until now, and we feel that maybe they've crystallized for something useful at some point, but no longer the needs of now, right? So the institution actually becomes alive, right? Actually starts dying. It gets alive because it, you know, it has to deal with its new context, and everybody inside feels like this, you know, this jacket is too small, or, you know, I feel these tensions. So then what? So how do we compose our institutions such that we you know, allow life to grow on them again? And I think that's
a wonderful phrase. That's a really wonderful phrase. And I want to I have so many more questions, but I also want to acknowledge that there are other people who are watching. And if you are, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions or comments, please put them into the chat, and my colleagues Cecil and Jonathan are feeding them to me. I think there is one particular comment by Juliana Espana Keller, who says that she studies in Australia. And she's saying something, I think, which is very central to all of your arguments, where she says that there are so many ethical challenges in fieldwork that are unattainable because we speak to an invisible body. Right? And I think this is something that's critical because there is a lack of materiality when it comes to institutional planning, where our bodies, in fact, become data streams or resources or different kinds of measurable entities. And how do you bring like the body back into the equation, I think is something that all the three of you work with in conditions of embodiment, and also perhaps connecting that to the fact that if you take the body seriously, there will be no safe space for education. There will be risk, and there will be danger, and there will be negotiation, and you will have to learn how to deal with it. I'm wondering how you would respond to that.
I think if I might jump in, it is the first actually word that came in my mind. It was exactly this risky feeling. It's really risky, but it's also a risk that that also comes with with change and challenge. That at the moment in which you decide to take up a challenge, you also have to accept the fact that you might follow into a trap full of risks, and it's about learning how to deal with it and negotiating also with yourself, because then you also put your own doubts and your own certainties at risk time and time again. And when it comes to ethical issues in the field, and it's not just in education, it's also when it comes to community work. And for example, I worked for many years in applied theater, so in a socially engaged theater. Ethical questions are prominent, and the ethical questions raise especially when these projects start dealing really with institutions that wants to place upon the project in itself a sort of a head of evaluation, and everything becomes quantifiable. And the first thing that start to go away are exactly matters of body, matters of affective experiences. So when we bring back a more experiential discourse into this, it definitely becomes vulnerable, but it's a matter of vulnerability for everyone who is involved. It's a matter of vulnerability for the people who are conducting field work. It's a matter of vulnerability for the people, the participants of a workshop. It's a vulnerability for students and for teachers, because you put your own body, your own embodied experience directly into place. So, and that is also risky because it challenges exactly the hierarchy that regulates institutions and society. So in the moment in which myself as a teacher, which whatever we put it, I'm in a position of power with respect to someone else, for example, to students. In the moment in which I put myself as an experiential and my experiential and my embodied experience directly there, I become vulnerable, because it's not about the role that I'm taking. I'm a person. I'm not necessarily a teacher. So, and then that becomes really vulnerable. But then it's also a matter of wanting to accept it or not.
Thank you. And I think this is exactly where the tension sometimes lies, is that our institutions are not built for vulnerability.
No, exactly.
Right? Thank you so much for that input, Fabiola. Jeroen, there is a direct question to you from Philo. And Philo is asking, if we see communities inside or outside of institutions as an organism with different parts, what does that mean for enabling, facilitating, supporting peer-to-peer learning? Because within the community also, there are multiple ways by which people learn, interact, and grow. And this is not going to be in our control in any form, right? And this is true for small classrooms as well as large social movements. And he wants you to kind of respond to that if possible.
Okay, so the question is, when you have this more or less bigger community, how this relate to peer-to-peer learning? I can make a relation in answering that to the last question about this invisible body. So let me first start, and I come to that question because there is a good relation between that, because the invisible body, in fact, is also the monster. and Fabiola and I studying texts like Gramsci's, talking about time of monsters. So we're in institutions are monsters and curricula are monsters. And the question is how to relate to monsters. And yeah, there are all kinds of ways to relate strategically or tactically to monsters. I've learned in my own experience as being a person to have respect for monsters. And that started when I worked with children with psychiatric diseases, lost children, often without parents, very badly treated, punished, wrapped up completely. Um, and Yeah, what we learned there, I was very young then when I worked there, and what we especially learned is that when you try to find the monster, you lose. You lose yourself, or you lose from the monster, because the monster is always bigger than yourself. So the only way to beat a monster um, is to respect the monster, to let it near you, and to start to know what it is and how it works and how it evolves and what strategies it uses and how it is funny and sometimes very miserable. And so this way we also work with these badly injured children, and this way we win trust. And we had always, I had a Belgian colleague once when I started this, and she was very huge person, really mother figure in this. And she said, we have one law, she said, and that's the only law that counts. And her law was, and I still remember it every day when I am in difficult situations, she said, the law is that we work with the concept of and just yeah, how to mention it in the good language. It's a kind of law. Love has to be something in stone. So when what we always get into the trap that a child try to make you become the bad guy in a fight because you started to fight also, and we put it in stone that we stayed loving him. So the monster wouldn't win from him or from us. And this
Yeah,
worked. I don't know why. Now going back to the peer-to-peer learning, what has this all to do with peer-to-peer learning? I think that it's very essential in a community to stay um, with respect towards each other. And every time, me myself also, I get into disrespectful situations towards myself, towards others. But to stay in this sentence of deeply respected what is coming and nearing me, and then when it's nearing me, studying it, having fun with it, playing with it, getting to understand it, then suddenly something can arise, or it's not sometimes, it's really always. When I see it with my students, with teachers, with researchers, when they are studying good, then with deeply respect toward their peers, the answer will come.
yeah,
And the answer is coming, and I can prove it.
yeah. Thanks, Yaron. I think that's really wonderful. Also reminds me of how Donna Haraway used to playfully say that if I had to choose between becoming a Madonna or a mother, I'd much rather be a monster. Um, and I think there is kind of strength in it, right? To be hybrid and cyborg and bastard, and not have one origin story. So I think that's very useful. Theo, I know you will have much to say about this, but there is also one direct question for you, and I just want to give you the space before we start wrapping up. Cecil says that she's really interested in your work on farming and sustainability that you also talk about in your videos. And I think this is something that as people working with art institutions, we also are very curious about, because how do you see this kind of very situated process connected to land and people's bodies and lives, and what happens when it becomes transferred into a disembodied learning environment? right? Like, how do you take up something so viscerally situated, and then suddenly, here we are on Zoom calls, trying to deal with this situation.
Yeah, don't do it. Next time we meet on the field, with boots. Because I don't believe you there's a way you can meaningfully learn these kinds of things in an abstracted way. So yeah, don't go there. It's really bringing the classroom, to the field, and make the diploma the farm. So you just don't try to like. Education, as we know it, came out of a very specific need, right? In the industrial times, and now we recognize what we threw away with that, and we're gradually trying to find our way back into sort of an embodied learning. We don't have a lot of instruments for that yet, but we can maybe remember the future. So, something that is very important that I realized is, especially when you work with nature, because nature is unfathomable. It is so fast, so ever changing, so particular, and so complex, beyond human control and understanding, even though we are a part of that, right? So any attempt to control that, which is very much what we're trying to do, make all these categories and disciplines in it, and even if you would go today to a agricultural school, nobody would know how to farm. I'm serious. Yeah. So that everybody is being taught a particular part of the agricultural industry, but nobody is a farmer becoming a farmer. So that's ridiculous. The first time I discovered this, it was what is going on? Yeah. So there's very few places in the world where you can still actually become a farmer. So when dealing with nature, I believe you need to develop a language through which you can communally advance your understanding and your relationship with nature. And that is not, but what we are used to is to impose concepts on it, to have frameworks, concepts, categories that we bring in. It's like, here you get a lens, here you get 5 permaculture frames and SIGs, whatever, and something, even with the best intentions, right? It's also great work, and it does a lot of good, but that's not the starting point. The starting point is working from experience and observation together, becoming part of your land and having a language through which you communicate and express what you experience with others, so that people can understand it and build on that. And that is the first lost art of learning. Yeah, that's maybe that's the most fundamental thing I think.
Yeah.
I would like to say about this.
Well, I think that's a really great way to start wrapping up this conversation. I can't believe that 1 hour has just gone by. But when you talk about the language and its relationship with nature, it reminds me of the work of an Indian artist called Abhishek Hazara, who had this wonderful installation which was called "But Does the Frog Know Its Latin Name?"
Right.
Largely figuring out saying it doesn't care, right? Like you might try to build a taxonomy and a genus for the frog, but it doesn't really care whether it knows to know it or not.
Could I add some little?
Yes,
you
of
just
course.
sparked a little, because the Sanskrit was developed, in a community at a particular time that gave rise to an entire Renaissance, and it is in developing that language that gives access to the world, that I think the great learning, the collective learning lies. We do not, we are so careless about language. We're careless about understanding and wisdom. So I think we just think we can pluck it from the internet, but it's not the case. We have to do our work.
Yeah.
And if we can create the equivalent of a Sanskrit that sort of puts into practice our unfolding ontology of being part of a greater
Right.
multi-being earth, then I think that's a good start.
Absolutely. No, it's of course the Murphy's law of panel conversations. At the minute the moderator announces that it's time to shut down, everybody has the most interesting things to say about it, including the participants in the chat. I do want to, however, be mindful of the time and saying that it's taken a lot of time to consolidate this 1 hour. I also want to remind you who have already given us so much, but also all the people who are watching, that the webinar is not an end on itself. We are really hoping to use these expert inputs to generate a toolkit that we can offer administrators, learners, and teachers to figure out how do you build connected learning futures and what are the key things that you want to kind of put out. So if anyone's interested in joining us to design this toolkit, to co-create it with us, please leave a comment here in the videos or join our Facebook group or the email mentioned on the landing page as well. And with that, I just want to thank the three of you for so patiently and generously sharing your expertise, ideas. A lot of the things that were said were very complex. I don't think I understood all of it, so I'm going to have to revisit this conversation again. And the good part is that the conversation is being recorded, so anybody who wants to visit it, share it, please feel free to do that. Thank you, Cecil and Jonathan, for moderating the live conversations, for producing this for us. Thank you very much to the Artes University of the Arts and the entire community that gives us the space to have these conversations in real time, even as we are struggling to shift education online and now back offline as well. So we really hope that these conversations will give us perhaps a new language onto what is the future that we want to teach in, the future that we want to teach for, and the future that we need to shape together so that all of our practices make sense. And thank you very much for sharing that with me today.
Thanks for having us, Nishant, and thanks for making sense of all these complex things that came out today.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.